What happens when one of the biggest names in the amusement park industry is told it might be better sold off? That's a situation Kings Island's parent company, Six Flags, finds itself in right now, and the decisions made over the next few months could define the company for years to come. Well, hello, everyone. Alongside Ryan Sir, I'm Don Helbig. This is Tower Topics.
Tower Topics drops 3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So hit that subscribe button or follow us on your favorite podcast app.
Ryan, this is like a soap opera. It seems like every day there's some other development or something going on with Six Flags, and right now we have Jana Partners pushing for the company to explore sale, while also calling for immediate board leadership changes. It's more than this, activist investor, group here, putting on pressure. It's a direct challenge to whether Six Flags' current leadership structure and strategic direction are capable of restoring confidence at a time when the company can least afford uncertainty.
I've got a graphic for this. Yeah, and
You do.
So, for those of you who are listening to audio, I've very cleverly put a picture of the Titanic up on the screen, which will also be the thumbnail. Spoiler alert. But and this is a metaphor, and I mean it more than just a joke, because it seems like everything that can go wrong is going wrong. It seems like incompetence in areas where they can't afford to be incompetent is where we're seeing the most incompetence. It seems like, on the one year when they just really need to have a really good year, they had a terrible year. That was 2025. Oh, in 2026, so like we don't know what that's going to be like, but is there any indication that it could be better? A lot of the decisions they're making are the same, and some of them are completely unfounded, and they're confusing, like the regional pass and stuff like that. So, I mean, is this Jana Partner? Sorry, I keep on saying Jana Partners. Is this, are they sitting on a lifeboat watching the Titanic go down and trying to tell everybody to get off? That's the question, and that seems to be what their narrative is.
Yeah, and that's what makes it so significant what they're doing. And if you're a fan of Kings Island, this is one of those moments where what they are doing on the business side, of the industry, it really matters. It's not about the park experience stuff. It's the business side now, because there could be a lot of ramifications for this. Jana's concerns doesn't appear to be just about the stock price. It's about confidence, in them being able to do the job. And they're pointing to things like, the board dysfunction, inconsistent financial messaging, delayed communication, all those kind of things. It all matters, because when leadership looks uncertain, everything else starts to feel uncertain too.
Exactly. And things they cited were they believe that they had made a decision about John Riley being the CEO, but waited to announce it. There was some stuff with financial reports where they released guidance and then still revised them a week later, which they would have known that they were going to do, according to Jana. So a lot of stuff, a lot of this is very technical, and you're not going to be able to sit here and say like, well, they run 2 trains on this or that or whatever, because this is a lot more high level than that. But I think that the culture kind of like, that's where like our audience can kind of relate to that, because when we talk about like delayed communication, poor communication, that's been kind of the story of this merger. Even on like an individual level, it's like the priorities of the company aren't the same as what they have been in the past. So, with the regional passes, we don't know if that was a decision that was made at the 11th hour, or if they chose to wait until after they had sold all their passes to announce it. But it's just a lot of it's odd, and a lot of it is announcing things too late or not announcing enough, and you show up and find out kind of stuff. And I think that just from a consumer standpoint, I think that we can both agree that that sentiment is there. But I think that what Jana is saying is that from a corporate standpoint, for institutional investors, they're also not getting the information that they need. um yeah.
I think when Jana first became involved, when they first bought, was it their 9%, stake or whatever. And one of the things that I'd read about them was this, might not be good for Six Flags, because this is not, a group that just sits back. They want to see action, and they're like the bull in the china shop. So it wasn't going to be you know comfortable for those that were on the board and others running the show for Six Flags. So right now, with all this coming out, a very critical moment for Six Flags. They just brought in a new CEO, and he's having to deal with this with John Riley. They started repositioning the brand. They've made some very visible moves. Most recently, that partnership with Travis Kelsey, where he's
Mhm.
going to be like a brand ambassador for them. We had talked about ways to use him, kind of like Kings Island did back in the 70s with Dick Van Dyke. And then here we are a few months later, exactly some of the things we outlined that they could do with him, in the digital space. And that is things that they said they're going to do. All these things that they're doing since John Riley took over, it signals they're signals of a company trying to reset, Ryan, and but the activist pressure at this stage suggests the investors don't believe that reset is happening fast enough or clearly enough. Momentum only works if everyone believes in it, and right now, clearly, not everyone does.
Yeah, it's interesting that they're looking for a full replacement of the board this quickly because they got a new CEO, and when you get a new CEO, a lot of people go away, but they're not sitting around waiting for that. They want it done now, and their rationale seems to be a little bit more surface level. Like it's not entirely clear to me as to why they're asking for such a thing. Um, but I think that I mean, I use the term, well, it's not the C-suite, but I use the term very infamously C-suite enema, which is what they're
Yes.
gonna what they're gonna get, where it's like obviously the thinking of the company, the direction of it, the thought process is not in a direction that's conducive to success, and they need to start over. I think John Riley realizes that. So this may I mean, he can ask for a lot to get a little too, like the Jana people. So, for example, fire the board and do a sale might just mean fire the board, you know. So we don't know how that's going to go. They own enough of the company to probably demand board seats. They can't demand to have the entire board replaced. That's kind of absurd. But I mean, there were activist investors with Disney that tried to get 2 or 3 board seats just because they were unhappy with the direction the company was going. You know what's funny, Don?
Hmm.
And I was thinking about this earlier today. Um, if they sell the company, by the way, just to squash anybody that's hoping Disney, Universal, or United Parks, or whoever's going to buy them, it's going to be private equity. Uh, and then private equity, Apollo Global Management tried to buy Cedar Fair in like
2009.
2009. Yeah. And
2009, 2010, and I remember that very, very well, and that almost happened.
right, except there was an activist investor, Q Investments, with Jeffrey Raynor that stopped it. But now there's an
Hmm.
activist investor that wants to sell. It's kind of funny how it's flipped. My, how the tables have turned, isn't it?
Yeah, now
Um,
share with our listeners, if you will, Ryan, if one of those private equity companies they were to purchase the company, what that would mean.
so at best, it would mean very little. At worst, it would mean really bad stuff. Um, so obviously, like one of the names that was thrown around when Paramount was looking to sell was Blackstone. That's another good candidate that could buy it, or it could be, you know, Jana and a couple of different, 3 or 4 different ones go together and buy it. Um, but with private equity, they are in the business of flipping stuff. So they buy stuff and then they sell it. Sometimes they hold it for longer than you think. Like Great Wolf Lodge was owned by Apollo Global Management. Now it's owned by Apollo and Blackstone together. So you can see with them that there is some expansion. They're building new lodges and stuff because they're seeing the growth and they're holding on to it. Ultimately, what they're going to do is spin it off so it's its own stock. They'll make billions of dollars off of it. What they're probably going to do with Six Flags would be my guess would be they would sell it. Um, a lot of people would lose money because it's lost like 49% of its value in the last year or so. Uh, but everyone would have to vote on it, a total sellout. There would be a tender offer, and some private equity firm would buy it. They would probably not sell off individual parks. they would probably hold on to it. It would be kind of bad. If you remember 2006 at Kings Island, I'm sorry, 2005 going into 2006, when the sale was going to go through, like Paramount wanted to sell, they had no interest in it, but it was still there. How there was like, one or two shows and not the best operations and not the best hours. And that's when kind of 4th of July got cut down a little bit. That's the kind of stuff you would see. Worst case scenario, you would start seeing serious park sell-offs, and I'm not talking about selling to enchanted parks. I'm talking about like, hey, Magic Mountain's worth more as a condo complex than it is a park. They're in this for a very quick flip, so it's very risky if this were to happen. Now, it's not to say Kings Island would close. Remember, SeaWorld was owned by Blackstone. Now it's United Parks. That's going just great, but it still exists. They didn't lose any parks or anything like that. They might, well, actually, they might lose Sesame Place, but based on that lawsuit. The Universal parks were run by Blackstone and ended up selling them to GE, who in turn sold them to Universal Studios, again, ironically. So this stuff happens. It's not a death sentence, but I will tell you, if a multi-billion dollar private equity firm buys the park, it doesn't mean we're getting our $30 million coaster. It means quite the opposite in the short term.
No, it doesn't. And one of the other things that I find interesting is when the merger first took place, there was the Kings Island fans, the Cedar Point fans, they were kind of relaxed about it, saying it's not going to impact us. That Cedar Fair, still has controlling interest. It's their people running the show. You look now who's left. Not many Cedar Fair people left. It's mostly Six Flags people and whoever came in from the outside, now involved. So very little Cedar Fair influence still involved with it. So I found, that to be, something that was noteworthy. But, at this point, I think, Ryan, when you're looking at Six Flags, they have two realistic kind of paths. One, you stay the course. John Riley and the current leadership can, prove that they can, they get the chance to prove that they can execute, stabilize the business, and rebuild confidence, which isn't there right now, or they change direction, and that could mean a sale or changes, both. So I think those are the two options that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, I mean, something's gonna happen. Rekindling confidence. I think that like my personal non-financial advice opinion is that I think that John Riley has not had the opportunity to do that. I think give him a season. Let's see how he is able to be pragmatic and agile and stuff when things don't go the way that they're supposed to go. Let's see how he can do that. But Jana does not feel that way. They feel as though this is a done deal. That's why they need a new board. Explore. They didn't say to sell. They said explore a sale. But I don't know how much of that would be like more of a scare tactic than anything.
I think to me, I think that might be what it is more of a scare tactic. And you look at, yeah, sure, there's some out there that might have interest in buying the chain. But overall, when you look at the price that they got for the parks they just sold, not a very good return, really. It was millions, less than you and I thought that they would go for.
I thought it would be just shy of $1 billion.
Yeah,
and
we
in
both,
my
and
defense,
it should have been. And there's other people around the industry that I've talked to since that was announced, and they all felt, that it was in that range, 500 million or so, more is what they thought it would have gone for than it did, which puts it in that range that you and I were talking about. So, is the interest, if it's there, it's not going to bring the kind of money that, you would think maybe based on that sale. I don't know, but, very interesting times. They've got some of the parks that have just now, opened for the season, really the first parks under the John Riley watch, his era. Mixed reviews on it. Six Flags Over Texas, where they're putting a lot of investment in. Seeing a lot of negative sentiment about the parks on social media. There was a lot of excitement with the things the park was showing, but once the gates opened, they're finding restaurants closed, rides closed, one train operations and things. So things haven't gone as well, according to social media. That it looked like the promise was there for a great season for Six Flags Over Texas. Now they haven't opened their new coaster yet, but we'll see. Six Flags Over Georgia, not a great opening weekend. Uh, Carowin seemed to be okay, but just a lot of, and you got King's Dominion. If you look at you follow, the website, the park hours, that we've already seen, for the springtime, spring break period, hour changes there. What was once a 9 o'clock close became 8, became 7, now 6. So keep an eye on the calendars because some of those hours are getting cut back, and that's just one of the parks there. I mean, there's other ones. I haven't looked at every single park's calendar, but there's already a lot of changes taking place this early. So that has me a little bit concerned. Going into the season, what that's going to look like.
Yeah, and I think that aligns with what we kind of discussed a couple weeks ago, the have and the have-nots. And a lot of, I mean, you even mentioned like they're super excited about Six Flags Over Texas because, that area is a high growth area, high potential. The park is under leveraged. They also don't have the luxury of time. It's the same with Carowinds. Remember, Carowinds was going to be the next Cedar Point, and the Charlotte area is growing and stuff. And it's like, well, it's been 10 years now, and the park's doing rather well, but is it doing 3.5, 4 million people? No. So at what point do you just say like this is what it is? So I'm afraid that the investment in Six Flags Over Texas and even Six Flags Over Georgia. By the way, I had friends that went down there that had a really good time, but they also have all season fast lanes, so they weren't deterred by one train operations and slow lines and stuff as much as other people were.
Which one was that? Which park?
Over Georgia.
Yeah.
They said they had a really good time, but the fast lane was absolutely necessary. Was kind of the way that they phrased it.
Did they note the one train operation stuff?
They would know about that. But anyway, but Six Flags Over Georgia performs, but it's no Cedar Point, it's no Kings Island. Six Flags Over Texas has a lot of potential, but it's still kind of like a small fish in a big pond. And I think that they're going to see things the way that they are until they're out of the situation. We need to cut. Where do we cut? The park that does 1.25 million. Let's cut there. So will Kings Island see cuts? Absolutely. But I don't think it'll be cut the way that Kings Dominion is.
No, but there's so many, when you're in those situations too, we've touched on it. We haven't done an episode on it, and we probably should once Kings Island opens and we start to see some of those things that would be cuts. But there's different ways to save money without really impacting the guest experience there with it. But when you're looking at Jana Partners, they're certainly going to throw their weight around, and it's unfortunate because it's impacting the start that John Riley deserves to have. He needs that chance. Like you said, give him a year. See what his ideas bring, and if things haven't turned around, aren't heading north, then you start to do some of the things that John is doing, I think.
Yeah, and honestly, if you want to give him a chance and let him rebuild the company and get a new board and stuff, I mean, maybe that's necessary. I honestly think that there's so much dysfunction, and they kind of allude to this in a lot of the articles. Like our experience alone with the dysfunction and the pettiness and just of these people, where they've completely lost sight of the fact that the park belongs to the guests. Like Kings Island belongs to the people of Cincinnati. Yeah, Six Flags has got the equity in it, but just being a child and just assuming that people are going to show up and it's their honor to be your customer. That sort of stuff is what drives people away. And I think that I don't think that anything here that's listed is kind of going to be like a big customer service boost. But I think John Riley might either realize that or have to realize that and might need to kind of start over with better people. There's a lot of great people that work for Kings Island and Six Flags and former Cedar Fair and the other parks, but there's also a lot of people that just they don't have the right mindset. They just take a lot for granted, and they've forgotten where they come from, and it should be their honor to work for the park and work for the Shield, work for the company, and not like I work here and so you get to come to my party, or let's just do it because like people will show up anyway. That kind of mentality is what drives people away.
It does, and it goes down, or kind of goes back to that thought that I've had for the past couple of years, is that You go to Kings Island and Cedar Point and some of the other parks in the company, and you feel processed. You know that they want your visitation, they want you to spend money on everything, but they're not really valuing you as a guest. It's not important to them. They can say it; it's all lip service though, but they can say it matters. That you have a best day ever. It doesn't. They don't really care. As long as you show up, as long as you spend money, you're processed. They got what they wanted. You go to some of these other parks, and from the moment you walk in until the moment you leave, you feel truly valued. Like they
Mhm.
appreciated you taking time out of your day, or choosing to go there on vacation, whatever. You just feel good about your choice going there, and you don't necessarily have that vibe anymore at some of them are gonna, their listeners are gonna say, no, I feel great at Kings Island, and you're basing it on you get to ride the beast and time. It's more, it's a bigger picture than that. Just riding your favorite coasters. It's the overall experience and how you're made to feel and everything. And I was hoping, and I thought, and there's still hope. I'm still optimistic that John Riley's going to be able to institute that kind of a culture, where the guests are valued. They do want you to visit. It's not going to be, they want you to buy the season pass, but if you use it, you're abusing it. That kind of vibe.
Mhm.
If you buy a dining plan, oh, you're using it twice a day, you're abusing it. You're abusing the dining plan because you chose to get, 5 drinks during your visit. So you have that kind of a mentality, that's in place that he's coming into that he's got to fix to make. When you talk about wanting to make Six Flags Parks, a destination of choice, for people across the country. When you look at where all the locations are, why do you want to choose a Six Flags Park? They got to change the culture. They got to make it, make you feel, wanted there. But he's got to be given the chance to do that.
Mhm.
And if you have the activist groups and putting on all kinds, he's got to focus on that rather than focus on the parks itself.
Yeah, and the shareholder lawsuit and all. I mean, he's got a lot of stuff to deal with. I'm not envious of that dude. But you're entirely right. And again, the scary part about this is that, with the exception of Cedar Point, every one of Kings Island's peers that are kind of in the region are exemplary examples of, you know, being glad that you have guests, being honored. You got Kennywood, you got Holiday World, you got Dollywood, you got Kentucky Kingdom. I mean, you're boxed in by Hershend and the Cook family. So you might want to like be a little bit more honorable with your guests. But also, you
You
talk
do
about
have options. Yeah, you do have options as a guest. So it's an important year for Six Flags and Kings Island.
yeah, don't screw it up. But also, you talked about changing the culture, and I think that the only way to change the culture will be to change the people. In a lot of cases, they did enemize. That just came up. Is that a word? Do you think? Like when you use an
It
enema
is
on
now. You just
somebody,
made it one.
enemize. Yeah, write that down. But you had the as adorable as it is predictable individual, which I think should have been their last day at the park, saying that about season pass holders. But they're gone now. Um, and then, you had, other petty individuals who unfortunately got to leave on their own regard. But that's a good start. But I think that the culture from the top going down. I mean, may I remind you that you and I, without contacting anybody at the park, got an email from a higher up person saying, "You're harassing my employees, and we're not going to work with you." It's like, well, you know what? We don't need to work with you. You need to work with us, based on what we're talking about in today's meeting. So that person needs to go, because just the fact that they have absolutely no control over the narrative whatsoever, where you've got this podcast that's reaching more and more people, and you're intentionally throwing gasoline on a fire. I think that's pretty foolish, and I think that's very short sighted. And that person, to be like in like a VP or whatever position, the director kind of position is insane. That kind of childlike stuff should have been what I would expect out of the child that ran the social media until recently. But a grown woman acting that way is just insane and completely unprofessional. So I think, again, change the culture. You got to change the people in a lot of cases. I think that the board probably needs to be replaced based on the performance over the past couple, or since the merger at least. The C-suite most certainly needs to be changed. This is all my personal opinion, by the way, because I think that every aspect of operation, whether it's finance or operations or tech or anything like that, all of which leave a lot to be desired. Everything was a work in progress. The past perks thing took 3 or 4 years. Now that was a Cedar Fair problem. I don't know if that person is still with the company, but why did it take 3 years to come up with a program that didn't work? And then you scrapped it. And then you came up with a new one that you had for a year. Then now you're scrapping it again for a whole other idea. Like, why? Your marketing people with the region pass that came out months before the park opens, right? Let alone before your buyer season pass. I mean, everything just leaves a lot to be desired. Not everything that I'm mentioning is detrimental, but all of it is kind of like there was a better way to do it. And if you're in a position to do it that way, then you should have. If you're in a position where you can make those decisions for such a large company, then you should have made a better decision. And this sort of stuff with any other company would have been the end of you.
Yeah, the confidence thing that Jana talks about, where there's not a lot of confidence with the investors in that, but there's also you have a loss of confidence with the guests just because of all the communication issues
Mm-hmm.
and the different changes to things, or last minute changes to the pass program, or you buy your season pass now all of a sudden there's a lot better deal out there that you could have done. So I mean, I think there's just a lot to be worked on. Long way to go, but I'm still very optimistic if he gets the chance uh, to run his own show there. I'm very optimistic still what John Riley can bring to the table for Six Flags, and I think he can change a lot of that culture, a lot of things that the pain points as a guest in terms of that culture, what it leads to. Um, the communication, I think he can help improve that. It's a lot of little things that end up being a big thing when you don't get it right. But I believe that they got the right guy there. I just hope that he gets the chance to do it. So Ryan, with this episode, what we're talking about, I think this is one of those stories where the outcome, it's not going to happen overnight, but the direction it's going to be set soon. And when that direction is decided, it's going to tell us a lot about where Six Flags is headed next. What it's going to mean for the Kings Island, fans, and all of those kind of things, because this isn't just a business story that we're talking about here. For Six Flags, with what Jana, the pressure that Six Flags is facing, this is a turning point.
Yeah, and then so this is from NPR. For those of you who aren't super familiar with it, we covered a lot of this stuff, but this is the bullet point breakdown of Jana's points. First one is the failed merger integration. So July 2024 merger between Cedar Fair and Six Flags failed to realize the promised synergies, resulting in a 60% decline in stock price. I don't necessarily agree that there's an A to B there in terms of the integration led to that, but obviously those cost synergies that they promised didn't work out the way that they thought. Disjointed decision making. John had cited a crisis of confidence, including the board stalling for days to announce a CEO, John Riley, in late 2025, which I brought up earlier. Erratic guidance. The board was criticized for reaffirming financial guidance in September 2025, only to slash it a few weeks later. Fire sale taxes. Jana criticized the board's decision to sell 7 regional theme parks, including Valley Fair and Worlds of Fun, as a desperate fire sale of core assets that failed to resolve the valuation gap. We talked about that in board entrenchment. John is demanding the replacement of the current board chair, Marilyn Spiegel, to prevent further value destruction. So that's basically the bullet points. We kind of covered all that, but I didn't realize they had a problem with the Enchanted Park sale, but we talked about that anyway and how it was a fire sale.
It's dominating the industry news right now.
Let's give a shout out to our Prestige members. I want to give a big shout out to Miss Mandy, 1983, Lil Mac, 21, Brian Hauser, 330T, Aaron Board, Jacob Fix, Damon Barnes, Dakota Cole, Eric Grau, Gibson Hills, Connor Wheeler, Dustin Jackson, Songstress Miku, Medic 302, Eastern Coaster, Guys and Girls, Justin Y, Mike Garrett, Galaxy B-Boy, Greggy Rocks, Kayla Lott, T. Cleveland, and Tim Dwelly. I want to thank you guys so much for supporting Tower Topics at the highest level. That's the prestige level. If you want to be involved in Tower Topics, there's a link in the description. Members get early access to the videos, exclusive content, exclusive live streams. Some tiers and get some free stuff. So hit that link in the comments if you're interested, in the description, rather. Starting at just $2.99 a month, and it's the best way to support Tower Topics. With that being said, we'll be right back with the listener questions. First listener question, Brian from Middletown, Ohio. He said, "Hey guys, recently I was watching a YouTube video about the construction preview of Phantom Theater opening Nightmare, and they mentioned that the targets for the ride were a new piece of technology that Sally Dark Ride has not yet used in a project. They explained that the targets were now going to be projections. While this sounds good on paper, what happens if slash when these projectors fail? There was one projection effect on Boot Blasters that I think I only saw working once or twice. Given Kings Island's past with upkeep and maintenance on park dark rides, I'm a little nervous about the targets being projected. I can definitely see a future where the ride vehicles turn a corner and they're all, when we all sigh and put our flashlights down and go, oh, the targets aren't working in this section. Am I right to be nervous? What do you think? Love the show.
I do think you have a right to be nervous. I don't think it's because Kings Island's, the maintenance and the tech teams, they, just neglect things and, aren't on top of it. I think what it comes down to is the resources, that they would have to keep on top of it. There's a lot more things around the park that are happening, every morning to get the park ready to open than they have people to take care of. So it's not the deepest team. It's one of the best teams in the industry, with maintenance and the tech side. I mean, they've got some of the best people in those departments. I want to be clear about that. So maintenance wise, there are attractions that go down, and it'd be very easy, for them to say, it's just, down for the count. We'll get to it at the end of the season, and not worry about it anymore. But if there's a way to get that ride back up and operating, the Kings Island maintenance team, they make it happen. They find a way, but the parts in that they have to work with. You look at Whitewater Canyon, a lot of other parks that would not have reopened last year. Congo Falls would not have reopened. But they're among the most talented, most passionate, hardest working people in the industry in their respective departments with maintenance and tech services. But again, there's not enough of them. They're not. It's not like a Disney or Universal where there's that many people in the department that every ride has its own team assigned to it. Almost. So they get spread a little bit thin. They do the best they can. But yeah, I think there's going to be times where there's going to be things in Phantom Theater opening Nightmare that are not going to be working. I think that's just the reality of the situation.
Yeah, and I guess, to partially play devil's advocate and try to take an optimistic take, maybe this will be lower maintenance than those targets and the guns and stuff. Like I heard about this whole technology thing a couple months ago, but I don't know how it works. So it could be something that's very straightforward, very few moving parts, and it's just a matter of keeping the projectors going, which is a challenge in its own. But let's hope that as a new technology, it's just simpler to maintain because the other
Mm-hmm.
stuff just sometimes you get a gun that wouldn't work, and there's certain targets that didn't really work for years, or at least you couldn't shoot them or whatever. So we'll see in a couple months. I'm excited to check out this technology, and let's hope
Yeah, me
that it
too.
goes well. Jason from Cincinnati said, "Hi guys, is there a reason why KI adds rides by subtraction as opposed to Cedar Point? Is it because KI has neighbors and doesn't want to get too close to the property line, unlike Cedar Point, which has its own entire peninsula?"
No, when you talk about addition by subtraction, Cedar Point has they've removed rides to make way for new rides. They've had to. They're kind of landlocked. They've Kings Island has more room to work with than they do. I just think you want to keep things within a certain. You don't want to be too spread out and become too big. With the space that the park takes up. But Kings Island's not the only one that may remove a ride like Firehawk and put in Orion. Cedar Point has done that too with different areas of the park.
Yeah. And I think the thing though is like you talk about addition through subtraction. And I think that Cedar Point is particularly good at not doing that. We talked about how, they moved a bunch of rides to the boardwalk and stuff, but I think that Cedar Point is a bit of an outlier in that direction. I think that for Kings Island, it feels like it's a lot worse because there have been maybe 5 to 10 really bad decisions about what to remove to put in new stuff. we're talking about antiques and, the
Yeah,
flying scooter,
antiques,
stuff
flying
like that.
scooters. Yeah, there has definitely been some things like that, but
And I,
uh,
I think those stick out like a sore thumb.
yeah,
I
but
don't.
Cedar Point has removed attractions to put other things in. Not always a roller coaster for a roller coaster, but they've removed other like buildings or other rides, restaurants, and things to make way for other things. So it happens everywhere.
It does. All right. If you've got your own questions, you can email them to us at hosts at towertopics.com. Where is that? There it is. Host at towertopics.com. Your first name, the city you're from, as well as your question, comment, concern, buy or sell, your story. We'd love to hear from you. Don't want to do that? You can send us a text or a voicemail to 513-399-7538. That's 513-399-7538. If you send us a text, we may read it on the air. If you leave us a voicemail, we may play it on the air. Either way, we'd love to hear from you. I'm Ryan. That's Don. This is Tower Topics.